I'm Trudy Peterson, and I coordinate Village Voices for Capitol Hill Village. If you have seen on your screen, I think this meeting is being recorded. So because of that, we do ask you to mute yourself while the program is going on until we get to the point where you start to ask questions. Thanks, of course, to Maygene Daniels, who does publicity for us. Thanks to Karen Stuck, who always puts it in the news if we get it to her in time. And thanks, of course, to Judy Berman and Mary Bloodworth of the Village. Mary is our tech support for tonight and always behind the scenes. When we get to the part at which we do questions and answers, you've got two choices, of course. You can type your question in the chat, or you can use the raised hand function, or I'll try to just watch and see if somebody is waving at us. If you, though, think of a question as Ellen is talking, I encourage you to use the chat because you won't forget it then by the time she gets done. Let me also mention the 3 programs that are coming up for, shall we say, the winter term of Capitol Hill Village Voices. In January, on the 18th, Connie Citro is going to be back with us, and she's going to talk about the 2020 census and what it meant for legislative redistricting. You will remember that she was with us in 2020 talking about the census. Then we had hoped that she'd be able to talk about the census results last spring, but of course they weren't done in time. And so now she's going to talk about the 2020 census and legislative redistricting, something that we're all concerned about. That's a Tuesday night. On Monday, February 7, we have Robin Hinson Jones. She heard the talk that Avis Boland gave a couple of weeks, last month for Village Voices, and was struck by the change in diplomacy that is represented between the time of Avis Boland's father, Chip Boland, and when she was in the State Department, or as she said, to go from pale Mayo Yale to real diversity. And so she's going to talk about diversity in diplomacy and who represents America. Then in March, on a Tuesday, and this, we don't have this date confirmed. We have the speaker confirmed and the topic, but not the date. David Ottaway is going to come back. And if you remember a couple of years ago, he talked to us right before Mohammed bin Salman made his first visit to the US. And David was concerned about who this new Saudi prince was and what he was going to be doing. So David's going to come back. He's got a new book out on Mohammed bin Salman called The Icarus of Saudi Arabia. And so he'll be with us in March. So those are the 3 coming up for the winter term of Village Voices. Now, to our wonderful December program and Ellen Farrell. Many of you know Ellen, but she tells me that she began playing the recorder in college when her brother gave her one. She didn't actually go out and seek one herself, but was given one. Has been interested in the recorder ever since, but she became a lawyer and specialist in labor law, which is a long way from Renaissance music, it seems. But about 10 years ago, upon retiring, she decided that she was going to seriously invest in the recorder and in Renaissance music. And out of that, she founded with 2 other people, Capitol Early Music. And so it's a great pleasure to have a Christmas holiday talk about Renaissance music and what we all can learn from somebody who plays a recorder. Ellen, the Zoom room is yours.
Oh, thank you, Trudy. Thank you so much. And hello to everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. It gives me a chance to talk about Renaissance polyphony, which I love, and to share with you some of the music that I really love. As you can tell from Trudy's introduction, I am not an expert or a scholar of Renaissance polyphony, but I can give you a little bit of information about some of the characteristics of Renaissance polyphony, a few of the composers, whose music we know, the styles that they used, and the instruments that they used. I'll play some selections that I hope will illustrate what I'm talking about, and we'll show you what it is that I find so appealing and intriguing about this music. There's a few caveats to what I'm going to say. First of all, this is music of, we say music of the Renaissance, but it's really music of Western Europe Renaissance. There was a lot of, many other cultures were producing exquisite music during this time. That's not tonight's topic. That'd be another good one for you, Trudy. Find somebody who can talk about Middle Eastern music or Asian music. Secondly, this music is music that was written down. There were lots of popular songs and dances. They were part of the fabric of everyday life for everyone in the society, but they were not written down. Thirdly, this music was written 600 or 700 years ago. A lot of music has been lost in that time. So we're talking about music from institutions that, one, had enough money to hire scribes or purchase manuscripts and store the music. And secondly, institutions that had a use for music and an interest in music. This really boils down to the church and important political institutions. The church, of course, was the primary source of music, certainly in medieval times and even in Renaissance times. Music is a part of the liturgical services that are conducted several times a day. Wealthy churches, that is those that were associated with the Pope or bishops or other high-ranking officials, they had chapels that were, and this is just a term of art, chapels that were staffed by priests and canons who were singers, and they would carry out these duties of singing the office and mass and so forth. There were also collegiate churches, which had their own chapels of singers, but they also established schools that trained young boys in singing, in musical theory, and gave them basically a general education. This is really the beginning of the colleges, that we know, the universities that go back to medieval times. These are collegiate, they came out of collegiate churches. Most of the composers that we know came through this system and were employed as singers. They might get paid for a composition, but their day job, if you will, was singing. And they went to other chapels of nobles of the church, and then also of the political institutions. This is basically kings, noblemen, dukes, marquises, whatever. The political institutions also had chapels of singers for their use. And actually the political chapels included instruments, whereas the church tended not to have, many churches did not allow instruments in the church or for music services. The political institutions their court would not only want to have religious services, but also official ceremonies, court entertainment, and also for the personal use of many of the noble people in the household, the noble household. Women as well as men were quite well educated in music and interested in playing or singing themselves, and would commission compositions. So the collegiate churches are really the source of the music, or the musical theory and the styles. And some of the oldest and most renowned collegiate churches were located in Franco-Flemish lands. That is the Kingdom of France and the Duchy of Burgundy, which is northern France. It now covers what is now northern France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The style of music that was taught at the colleges, the Franco-Flemish collegiate churches, was basically became the predominant style throughout Western Europe. How? Well, the King of France and the Duke of Burgundy were very powerful politically. They controlled a lot of territory themselves outside of northern France. They intermarried in other lands. They had alliances with local nobility, or they conquered the territory. And they would travel to these territories, and they would take their chapel with them. The hosts who were hosting them on their travels would hear the singers and the composers. They liked what they heard, and they would steal away the singers and the composers. And these are all singers who had been trained in the Franco-Flemish tradition, and they now became employed in lands that are Spain, Germany, and especially in Italy. So what is this Renaissance style? Let me give you at least a couple of key characteristics. First of all, it's polyphonic, 3 or 4 voices, all melding together. Secondly, it's highly imitative. It's counterpoint almost all the time. Thirdly, it's rhythmically supple. There's a clear underlying pulse to the music, but the musical line doesn't necessarily follow that pulse. This music doesn't have any bar lines, and the reason it doesn't have bar lines is because they weren't needed. The pulse would keep going along. You can hear it in the music, but the line is really driving to a long note, and the long note may or may not be on the beat. There's lots of syncopation in this, and shifting meter from triple meter to duple meter, all within this same underlying pulse. So it's rhythmically a lot of fun to play, a lot of fun to me to listen to. And finally, the most common form of Renaissance music is vocal music, either sacred or secular. There were fewer works composed as directly composed as instrumental pieces, or solely instrumental pieces. But then, as now, vocal music was played instrumentally. So knowing the text is important to interpreting a piece. I want to start out by listening to a vocal work that's performed instrumentally to illustrate some of these characteristics. This is a fratella called In Te Domine Speravi. A fratella is a relatively simple composition. The lines are more rhythmic, on the beat, and homophonic than sophisticated Renaissance polyphony. But even in this piece, you will hear how each line kind of intertwines and is acting independently. And there's enough imitation in it to give you a sense of kind of what I'm trying to describe. A fratella is an Italian vocal form. It sets a humorous or secular poem most of the time. But in this one, it uses a text. The composer is Josquin des Prez, and I'll talk about Josquin in a minute, but really one of the giants of a Renaissance, late 15th century, early 16th century Renaissance music. Anyway, Josquin chose this text, which is based on the 30th Psalm. In thee, O Lord, did I hope to find pity forever, but in a sad and dark hell I was and suffered in vain. I was wounded, but in my sorrow I called upon thee. In thee, O Lord, did I hope. Certainly not frivolous and humorous, but it does have the energy of the fratella form. It's performed here on a loud band, which is of 3 shawms and sackbut. So let me just share my screen and we can try that. And if you'll make sure to mute me when I've got it going here, we'll be ready to go. Okay, did that wake you all up? It's just great sound, great great piece. And I will be glad to answer questions about the instruments, maybe if you have questions about that at the end. I'd like to delve a little bit more deeply into another vocal piece to get a sense of Renaissance style. This is Fama Malam, text by Josquin. It's a motet. Let me just say a couple of words about Josquin. He, as I say, a giant in Renaissance composers. His skill was sought after. He was educated and worked in France. He worked in the chapel of the, he was a singer in the chapel of the King of France, who took him to Milan. The bishop stole him away, and he then went on to work in Ferrara, in the papal chapel in Rome, returned to Burgundy for the last 20 years of his life. His compositions influenced other composers, both in his own lifetime and for decades after his death. He was really the stylist of the late 15th century. Fama Malam is a motet, which is by Josquin's time, it's just a form, a name term that's applied to any a form setting any text in Latin, either sacred or secular. This one sets the text of some lines from Virgil's book 4 of the Aeneid, which tells the story of Dido and Aeneas. And these particular lines are about rumor and how it spreads word of the affair and really ends up destroying the lovers, or at least destroying their affair. It says, it goes, rumor of all evils, the swiftest, speed lends her strength and she wins vigor as she goes. Small at first through fear, Soon she lifts herself into the air and walks the grounds solo, with her head hidden in the clouds. One of the hallmarks of Chuscan is his ability to convey the meaning of text through his music. So let me just talk a little bit about some of his compositional techniques that he does this. First of all, there's word painting, where he takes the opening phrase, fama malum, rumor, evil, and gives it a falling interval that is repeated in each voice. On the words, when he gets to the words velocious and mobilitate, swift and speed, he picks up the tempo, changes the rhythm a bit. Another characteristic Chuscan technique is alternating paired voices, taking 2 or 3 voices, assigning a line to them, the other voices drop out, and then later on another pair picks up melody. He uses this here. I think it helps spread the sense of rumors spreading all over. He uses a variety of textures, more so than some of the earlier Renaissance composers. He has homophonic sections where the parts all move together, are varied with and interspersed with polyphonic sections where all the voices are together. I mean, where the voices are imitating each other. And you'll hear that very much at the setting of the final line, which is the words "Ingredi turque solo, she walks alone, rumor walks alone." To me, this really expresses the triumph of rumor. Here she is, nothing else. And then there's a final little polyphonic conclusion that just has rumor flitting all around. I've chosen a clip that shows the score moving as the voices sing. And if you read music at all, you can you don't have to read the notes, but watch the shape of the music, and you'll see some of this homophonic setting or the paired voices and that sort of thing. If it drives you crazy, just close your eyes and listen to this wonderful music. there we go. Sorry. Another really gorgeous piece to my mind. I'd like to show you another piece from earlier in the Renaissance, early 15th century, to show you a little bit different style, but you'll still see the basic things we're talking about. This is C'est la Face Pâle. It's another chanson, song by Guillaume Dufay, written in the 1430s. Dufay was the leading composer of the early 15th century. Another Burgundian, he went to Italy and also Savoy. He really introduced many of the techniques that Josquin and the other Renaissance composers took up and developed. For example, Dufay employs the typical Renaissance rhythmic patterns, frequent syncopations, varying rhythms. He was also an adopter of an early adopter of the English style of intertwining the cantus and the tenor voices, and using sixths and thirds, whereas in medieval times the only permitted intervals were fourths, fifths, and octaves. So it creates this what was called the sweeter sound, and was really very popular in Renaissance. And this piece, C'est la Face Pâle, is a ballade. This is a poem in the French medieval form fixe, but Dufay doesn't, and in medieval times, the music would have also followed the form fixe, but Dufay does not do that. This is a freely composed piece. It's a typical courtly love poem. If my face is pale, the cause is loving. And for me, so bitter is loving that into the sea I want to send myself. You know, I love these really dramatic songs. And I can't believe that the people of the Renaissance really believed all of this. It was just a style. At any rate, this performance is by the duo Asteria. It's soprano and a tenor, and the tenor also plays the lute. The upper two voices, the cantus and the tenor, are sung, and then the lute plays the third line solo. So let's take a listen to that.
C'est la face pâle, la cause est amère. C'est la principale, étant étonnée, pour son bien heureux.
Okay, there we are with yet another beautiful piece. I just love the way those lines just keep going and going and going. The final Renaissance technique that I want to talk about is the use of the borrowed melody as a compositional device. It has its origins in church music. The Mass in the office had always been sung by chant, by simple polyphony in medieval times. By the time of Dufay, we see more elaborate composed polyphonic settings, and a typical way to do this, to make these elaborate settings, was to use a melodic theme throughout the whole piece that would give some structure to it. And one kind of melodic theme was a borrowed melody. The composer would take a well-known melody from another piece and use it as the tenor line of the new piece, and compose all the other parts around this. There are literally hundreds of masses composed in this way. This borrowed melody is called the cantus firmus, or the fixed melody. It could be chant. The melody could be from a chant. It could be a love song. Se la face pal, the song we just heard. Dufay composed a gorgeous mass based on using Se la face pal as the cantus firmus. It could be a drinking song. It could be an army song. L'Homme Armé is a tune that was used as the cantus firmus in several masses by numerous other composers. I think that they had a competition who could write the best L'Homme Armé mass. But basically, the composer is looking for something that the listener may know, can kind of hook their ears onto as they're listening to this longer piece, and sort of give it some structure in their own ears. When the cantus firmus is used, when a melody is used as a cantus firmus, the composer often slows it down or speeds it up or gives it a different rhythm. So it's not necessarily as clear as it was in the original song, but it still pervades. We don't have time to listen to a whole movement of a mass with a cantus firmus, but the same technique was used in chanson, and I've picked Jakob Obrecht's Tandernacken as an example, because it's a terrific song and because it's performed here on recorders. Obrecht was another Franco-Flemish composer in the generation that followed Dufay. His music was widely known and admired, even though he lived most of his life in Burgundy. Tandernacken was a Dutch tune, a popular tune that is about two young women of Andernach, the town of Andernach, who have men troubles. And he has put the tune in the tenor voice, and the top line is dancing all around it. So let's listen to Tandernacken. Okay, that's lots of fun. And let me just give you one more to finish up, one more example of using a borrowed melody. This is in improvisation. Improvisation was widely used through medieval times, Renaissance times, into the Baroque. And what what I'm really talking about using the borrowed melody is the composer would take a melody, and sometimes, you know, individuals could do this even without written out music, but take the melody and then play it in one voice, and then the voice on the top would improvise counter melody or ornamentation around it. The melody would be then repeated, and the improviser is required to come up with yet another variation. So this was a really popular style. I mean, we still hear this in folk music. We hear it in jazz. It's never gone out of style. This is this last piece is a Richicar by Diego Ortiz, who's a Spanish composer who worked in Italy, in Naples. He wrote a treatise on ornamentation for viol players. By the 16th century, printed music was widely available, and amateur musicians could read music and wanted to learn how to improvise. And so Ortiz wrote this treatise. It contains pages and pages of ornaments, written out ornaments. And the idea was that the student could read these and study these, and then pick out the ornament that was most suited for the piece that they were playing and plug it in the appropriate place. The treatise also contains several of Ortiz's own compositions, which are lovely. And one of the favorite of these compositions, one of the favorites for viol players, is a Richicar for bass viol, based on a ground bass, or a borrowed melody, which is really just a harmonic progression. This harmonic progression is of a Renaissance dance known as the passo mezzo moderno. So you'll hear the passo mezzo moderno just repeating. It's just, you know, like I think it's eight chords, and keeps repeating, and the bass viol has these wonderful variations on top of it. You'll hear in this performance, it's a viol consort. The bass viol is bowing the variations, and the other members of the consort, viol members, along with a lute, are playing the harmonic progression by plucking pizzicato. So let's listen to the Richicar Segunda. So another really just I just love this stuff. There you have it. That's what I have to say. I hope I've given you at least a window into this world of Renaissance music, and perhaps piqued your interest for further exploration. If you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them or talk a little bit more about the instruments that we saw, and that's anything you want to ask. So.
Well, thank you, Ellen. That was just a wonderful, wonderful way to enliven the holiday season. I'm going to take the host privilege and ask you a question, especially the chanson. It reminded me of troubadour music. What's the relationship between the troubadour music and what you play?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a relationship. The troubadours are really a medieval style of chanson, but based on these fixed forms, and probably not so polyphonic. You'd have one line and then an accompaniment, kind of treble dominated, with the other voices not being quite so important, but very much the Renaissance chanson come out of the troubadour tradition.
Questions? Okay, let me try another one. I've always seen the music, and wondered, how do you deal with it without bar lines? How do you know where and how long a note is to be held and how it relates to somebody else?
Well, the music, the notation itself has meter. The shape of each note is different. I don't want to go into it because it's actually fairly complex, because they don't always have the same length, but basically a note has the same length. And so you do have this sense of pulse, and I don't know what it is, but you really do. I mean, you get lost in the same way you get lost in any kind of music when you're playing it. And when I actually play from early notation with a group of friends, and we just go in and we mark where the cadences are, and if we get lost, we just go back to the last cadence and start it, at A or whatever. But it definitely, the music has meter written into it. It's just because it doesn't really, I think the reason is that it doesn't really follow, the line is not so strictly tied to the meter. Tied to the beat. Bar lines weren't as important. And by I'm trying to think, when do we start to see bar lines? Morley, I think, I don't know if he uses bar lines, but certainly in the 17th century, we're starting to see bar lines in some music, although some still doesn't have them.
Mm-hmm. Others? Questions? Oh, yeah, Peggy Rainwater. Peggy, if you would unmute yourself. There you go.
My wife, quite a musician, Peggy Rainwater, introduced me to the Boston Camerata some 40-odd years ago when we married. And we always play Boston Camerata music at Christmas, and we have it now on our system. But one thing that has struck me about this medieval and sometimes Renaissance music is the dance quality.
Yes.
The fact that the music itself promotes you, induces you to dance. You cannot not dance when you hear this music.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I don't really know a whole lot about Renaissance dance. The dance that we know of in early music today is really more Baroque dance, but there's no question about it. The problem is that the dance music as such was not written down. A lot of it was improvised, and played by even by people who didn't even necessarily read music. They would learn it by ear. They'd pass it around. They'd improvise on it. But I agree with you. Dance is very definitely, you know, all of this music that we heard has a real pulse to it. I mean, I think that definitely comes through with all of it. Some of the longer pieces, you know, perhaps are not quite so. You know, they're not quite so rhythmic, but I agree with you that it has very much a dance quality to it. I can talk about a little bit about the instruments if you want. All of these instruments that we saw, the shawms, the recorders, the viols, are all consort instruments. You know, they come in a matched set, if you will, in different voice ranges. The shawm is a reed, a double reed, distantly related to the oboe. It was the way it's constructed. The player does not rest their lips on the reed, so they don't have quite as much control over the dynamics. So that's why they're called loud instruments. They are loud. They were used by town bands. The municipal authorities would create these town bands with shawms. Sackbut is obviously a very an older form of trombone. Sometimes they put bagpipes in, and you know, so it's sort of very festive, ceremonial kind of music. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a shawm band playing from the steeple of St. Peter's or something? That'd be great. Recorders, these recorders that we heard were Renaissance recorders. You might be more familiar with seeing Baroque recorders. The difference is the Renaissance recorder has a straight bore, even though it's flared at the end. The inside is straight. The Baroque recorders became there was more soloistic music was being composed, and so this is the Baroque recorder was kind of developed as to be solo. It has a wider range of the instrument will just go for a wider range, and it has a conical bore, so it has a more focused sound than the Renaissance instruments.
Mary Proctor.
Mary Proctor have a question? Mary, unmute yourself, please.
The question was, what is a sackbut and how did it get its name?
I have no idea how it got its name. It is really basically an early, a trombone. And frankly, I am not an expert on brass instruments. So, it has the mouthpiece like a trombone, and the sounds are created by the mouth, you know, the embouchure that the performer creates, and then the slide also helps to create the different instruments. But I'm not really an expert on that at all.
In our last couple of minutes, Ellen, would you talk about Capital Early Music and what your plans are? What should we look for coming up?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Capital Early Music was just three of us who are recorder players. We've attended, one of the places where I really learned a lot about music was at workshops and week-long festivals in the summertime run by Amherst Early Music, which is a big sponsor of workshops. And there are a lot of people that I know here who couldn't take a week off and go to Amherst Early Music Workshop. So we kind of decided, let's try and bring something like that here. So we've basically brought in early music performers of really all kinds of music. Oh, thanks there, Mary put the link to our website in the chat. And we have the performers do a concert and then teach a one-day workshop to mostly amateurs. This season, we've returned to live performances, which has been very exciting. We had in September a Nota Bene viol consort who were playing Renaissance viols. They played Renaissance music and they were joined by a lutenist, Mark Rimple. In March, we're going to have two Baroque dancers and with a Baroque dance band. And the dancers will wear costumes, and we are really keeping our fingers crossed that the virus will have abated enough that we can do this. We require people to be vaccinated and wear masks during the concert, but so we're hopeful that will go on. And then the final concert of the season is in April. And it will be a recorder quartet of actually people, two people that in the quartet are people that I know and have taken classes with at Amherst. And we're gonna ask them to certainly make that the workshop would be on Renaissance music, so that those of us who have Renaissance instruments have a chance to play them, because we love playing Renaissance consort music.
Where do you have these events?
There's a church in Arlington, St. George's Episcopal Church, which has been extraordinarily kind to us. They make their venue available to us for their concert and for their for the workshop. It's right at the Virginia Square Metro stop. And they are very excited. They have just installed a new organ made by Martin Pazzi. And so they're going to be having a series of dedicatory concerts for their organ starting next year. And Capital Early Music is going to have a benefit in September with the organ and a recorder player who is both of whom are very experienced in improvisation. So it should be lots of fun.
And to get details on the times and stuff, your website is Capital Early Music?
CapitalEarlyMusic.org. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I can't thank you enough for just a wonderful, wonderful Christmas program. Thank you all for joining us. And remember to join us on Tuesday, the 18th of January for Connie Citro and the legislative redistricting occasioned by the 2020 census. So everybody, thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure, really my pleasure.